All right, it's 1 Corinthians chapter 11 from New King James Version. Paul says, imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. So he just starts out saying, follow me, follow my example, because I am doing things the way Christ has taught me to do them. So he's just saying he's a good example and you should follow his example. Not as if it's a binding legal requirement. He's just saying, I set a good example for you and you can follow in my example. Not that absolutely everything he ever does is perfect, because he admits to sin in his own life, but he's just saying he's a good Christian example for you, but not in an arrogant type way. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you. But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. So he's talking about the order of authority. Everybody is not equal. Every personality, every person is not equal with each other, and certainly not with Christ or God. There is an order of authority. God is the ultimate authority. Jesus Christ submits to the authority of God. Man submits to the authority of Christ, and woman submits to the authority of man. Now today that is certainly an offensive idea to even say that a woman should be submissive to a man. But that is the godly order, godly design. In the military, you have to have people with authority over each other, making decisions and leading the army. You can't have everybody being the leader, or else you will have chaos. So in order to have order, in order to have unison in the way that you do anything, you have to have a leader and those who submit to the authority. And woman is supposed to submit to man. I really think it's more husband and wife, because I don't think any woman is necessarily supposed to submit to the leadership of a random stranger who's a male, because you're actually not in that organization, in that team. You have to be a part of the organization in order to follow the order of authority, because that would create chaos too if you have random people following random strangers that may not even have the same goals in life. So it's really more in a marriage that the wife is supposed to submit to the husband, and there are certainly other scriptures that get into that detail. But just the overall structure, Paul says, follow me. I set a good example. He says, thank you for remembering me and following the traditions that I gave you. Now, he says traditions. He doesn't say laws and requirements. So he's listing Christian instruction as traditions, which I find interesting. So he could have described the Christian guidance as laws and binding requirements, but that gives the idea of bondage. But we've been liberated and freed from bondage, the bondage of obedience to law through Christ. I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. So now he's bringing in the idea of your physical head, your skull, your cranium, in comparison with your representative headship, or the one who has authority over you. And when he says praying or prophesying, certainly that gives the idea of, being a spiritual leader for other people. When you are in front of other people, providing a visible, direct display or example or some kind of spiritual leader in front of other people. And it says, if you have your head covered, you dishonor your head. I've debated this before, so I've studied it a lot, but I'm certainly not going to take the position that I've got everything completely figured out. So I would enjoy hearing your viewpoints. It's kind of difficult when you go through something and expect other people to see it and scrutinize it to get every detail correct. But every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. So I think what it's saying is, if you have your physical head covered, you dishonor your spiritual head, Jesus. If a man does it, his head is Christ. So a man should not have his physical head covered. Now, the Jews wore the little skull cap. I forget, the yarmulke, I think is what they call it. And I don't know why they do that. Now, but this is a Christian instruction, not a Jewish instruction. But, this is the reason why a lot of men take their hats off when someone prays. We'll get into that, I think, by the time this chapter is over, some of the details. But it's at least talking something along those lines. Don't cover your head with some kind of covering, a hat, a yarmulke, or a cloth, because that dishonors Christ. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. So it's the exact opposite. A woman should cover her head, and a man should not cover his head when he's praying or prophesying. And there were female prophets back then. So I think we would still stay in the same realm where you've got, someone who's standing in front of others, being a visible example as a spiritual leader. So you should make a distinction. You should easily be able to tell the difference between a man and a woman who's standing before you, because the Bible says the exact opposite. The man should not cover his head, but a woman should cover her head. Because if you do not do those things, you dishonor your head. So, and the head of woman is man. So if a woman does not cover her head, then she dishonors her head, which is her husband. For that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. So if a woman doesn't cover her head, it's just as shameful as if she stood before you completely clean shaven, bald. And most women, there are certainly some rebels, but most women like to have hair. And most women would be ashamed if they were shaved bald. If you had cancer or something and your hair fell out, it's a different situation. But if someone shaved you and made you go out in public, you would be ashamed. Most likely. Most people would be anyway. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. So that's a different word. You shear a sheep, and you don't shave a sheep bald. You just use the clippers and get it really close, kind of like a military haircut. It's, I don't know, a couple millimeters long the hair is. So, for if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. So that's another shameful thing. Most women would be shamed if you had all your hair cut off except for a couple millimeters. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, which indicates that there is a difference, shorn and shaved. Shorn is really short hair. Shaved is completely clean. Let her be covered. So I think that this covering is talking about hair. Now, some people think that it's talking about like a cloth or like a hat. And it's a little bit confusing. But hopefully it'll get cleared up a little bit as we go through it. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, so a woman would be ashamed if she was shorn or shaved, let her be covered. So there should be you should be able to see a difference between man and woman. Man and woman shouldn't look the same, especially when you're providing visible spiritual leadership to a group of people. A woman should have a way to display to those people that she recognizes the godly order of authority that he's already talked about. God, Jesus, man, woman. And if a woman stands up and provides a spiritual leadership example, then she should recognize, or she should display that she recognizes that order of authority, that she's not reporting directly to Jesus. If she's married, she reports first through her husband, and then to Jesus, and then to God. And I know this is offensive by modern day liberalism, but I try to live my life by biblical instruction instead of modernism. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. You see, back to Adam, God said, let us make man in our image. Now, I guess I generally think that would mean let us make humans in our image. Let us make humankind in our image, and I would include men and women. But this kind of implies that Adam was made in God's image, and then the woman was made in man's image, because the woman was taken from man and formed from man, whereas God formed Adam. God and Jesus formed Adam. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. You see that? Adam was made in the image of God, and Eve was made from the image of man. So you need to not forget where you come from. So verse 7, when it says when a man ought not to cover his head, I'm saying, well, does that mean he shouldn't have long hair to look like a woman? Or he shouldn't wear a hat? Well, to me, I don't think there's a problem with a man wearing a hat. But, just in general practice. And I don't think this is talking about just general daily operation. I think it's talking about under certain situations, possibly if you're standing in front of a group of people providing spiritual guidance and leadership, you should present yourself in a certain way. Man should be certainly distinguishable from woman. A woman should display that she understands the authority, the godly authority in the home. And man should understand that he reports to God, that he's the image of God. For man is not from woman, but woman from man. Nor is man created for the woman, but woman for the man. So going back to Adam and the creation, man did not come from woman. The original man, Adam, did not come from woman. He came from God and Jesus. But woman, the original woman, Eve, came from the rib of the man. Nor was man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. So the woman was created as a helpmeet to Adam. They created Adam and then said, it's not good that he should be alone. Let's create someone for him as a suitable helpmeet. So woman was created, Eve was created for man. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. So it says, for this reason, I think looks back and forward probably to the verse before and even what's said after it. So for this reason being, since woman was created to help man, to support man, to encourage man, to help meet the man's needs, she ought to recognize why she was created and how she reports through the order of authority. And she ought to have a visible representation of that on her head to reflect her spiritual headship, or the order of headship. And it also says because of the angels. Now, I think that's talking about, Satan and his followers were originally angels that fell from heaven because they did not recognize the order of authority. So they usurped God's authority, tried to do things against God's will, and then they were kicked out of heaven. So since woman was created for the purpose of meeting the needs and helping the man, and since the angels didn't recognize their order of authority, he's saying women ought to provide a visible display of their understanding of the order of headship. And I really feel like long hair accomplishes that purpose. And I think a man having long hair or trying to look like a woman defeats that purpose. A man should look like a man, and a woman should look like a woman. And hair is one of the ways that you can tell the difference. Nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord. So, man and woman are both dependent on each other. It's not that, man, it wasn't good for man to be alone. He needed somebody else. So he was dependent on God creating woman to help him. And woman is certainly dependent on man also. And you can't have any children without both a man and a woman. For as woman came from man, even so man also comes through woman. But all things are from God. So no child is ever born without God. But you need both a man and a woman to have any children for any life to exist on earth. Judge among yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God. So, some clarification and some confusion right here in this section. So judge for yourselves. Do you think it's right for a woman to pray with her head uncovered? Now, so far you'd say, well, does that mean without a cloth over her head, or does that mean without long hair? And then I believe here's the clarification. Does not even nature teach you that if a man has long hair, it's a dishonor? So man shouldn't have long hair. Even nature, even people, even children, young children, somehow quickly figure out that it's typical for women to have long hair and typical for men to have short hair. And if you see a man with long hair like a woman and you confuse him to think it's a woman, then that's not good. It's a dishonor to that person with long hair, to that man with long hair. It's a dishonor for you to confuse children so that they don't know whether you're a man or a woman. But if a woman has long hair, it's a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. Now, I have in the past studied the Greek words here, and I believe this word covering in verse 15 is a different word than every other time it says covering. I believe it here says peribalo. Peri means around, and balo means to throw. It's like throw a ball. And what was the other word? Katacalypto, I think, is the other Greek word for covering that's used everywhere else. And katacalypto just means a covering. It can mean anything, I think. But peribalo means something that you throw around. So that would maybe give you the idea of a cloth. It's something that you can throw over your head. You can kind of toss your hair around also. But I've made the point in the past that since katacalypto could mean any kind of covering, and parabolo means something that you throw around. And the only time this word is used to throw around is when it's in reference to long hair. So the covering in this whole chapter from the Greek word could mean anything. It could mean long hair or a cloth covering. But right here in verse 15 it says, a woman's long hair is given to her as something to be thrown over her head, as a covering, as a visible display to those who see her, that she recognizes the godly order of authority. So to me, I believe this is all talking about women should have long hair, men should have short hair. Men should look like men, women should look like women. Women should recognize and respect the godly order of authority. She should remember where she came from and what purpose she was created. Man should remember where he came from and what purpose he was created. Man was created from dirt. And how glorious is dirt? We were created from humble means by a glorious God. God is the one worthy of glory. We are worthy of dirt. So we shouldn't be puffed up with pride, especially, looking down on our wives and humiliating them, saying you should serve me because I'm your master. No, you're dirt. You were created by a glorious God, and you should respect and honor your wife, who was created from your side, from your rib. You should treat her with love and respect and kindness. And she should voluntarily, out of respect and love for God and for you, submit to your authority that God gave you, not because you deserve it, because you're dirt. And then this last verse 16 says, but if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom. Now this is a confusing verse because it could mean a few different things, and I really don't know the best thing that it could mean. Some people have said that this means we have no such custom of women having long hair and men having short hair. Why would Paul go through this elaborate explanation of the godly order of authority, talk about the difference between honor and dishonor when a man and woman has her head covered or not, has his or her head covered or not, and then say, oh yeah, but none of it matters, we don't even care? I don't see that possibility at all. So there's no way Paul's saying everything I've said so far means nothing if anybody wants to argue about it. So I don't see that possibility, even though some people make the argument. So I guess the only other thing I can see is that if anyone's contentious, we have no such custom. We have no custom for being contentious. You should not be contentious about this. You should, he even started the very first verse. He says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. He says, follow my example. I thank you, I praise you that you follow in the traditions that I have sent down for you. But if you want to fight and argue and be contentious about the things that I say and do and tell you should follow me in, we have no custom for being contentious with the instructions of God and the church, nor do the churches. So to me, I think it's saying you should not be contentious about this. You should just humble yourself and accept the instruction that God gives in the example that He gives through me in my life, or through Paul. Now, in giving these instructions, I do not praise you, since you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For first of all, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you. Now, he's been talking about divisions all throughout 1 Corinthians so far. It's one of the main themes, because he started out talking about I'm of Paul, or I'm of Apollos, and he was rebuking them for that. But there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. For there must also be factions among you, that those who are approved may be recognized among you. Therefore, when you come together in one place, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in eating, each one takes his own supper ahead of others, and one is hungry, and another is drunk. What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I do not praise you. So let's talk about this just for a second. So when they come together as a church, as a group of people, meeting to encourage one another, to teach one another, to learn from each other, there should be no divisions among you. You should be no one. I mean, everyone should love everyone. Everyone should care for everyone. You know, how many cliques do you have in the church that you go to? People love the people that they get to know and enjoy and have something in common with. But then how can you break in and be a part of their group? You know, everyone should welcome everyone, and you should recognize that what you have in common is a common faith in Jesus Christ, and you should love the differences of everybody and appreciate the differences that everybody brings to the table. But he says there must be factions among you, because whenever there's factions, that way you can recognize that those who have the factions or groups or cliques are at fault. That's how you recognize that someone is wrong, by when they do something that is wrong. And if you have a group of people who love everybody and support and encourage everybody, you can see that that is good. And when you see people that argue and fight and create cliques, you can see that that's bad. So you cannot have good, you cannot recognize good unless you can compare it to bad. And so a lot of times people say, why does God let bad things happen? Or why does God allow some people to be lost and save some by grace? Well, because you can't recognize good, you can't recognize love unless you see the opposite. And he says, when you come together, you're supposed to come together for the purpose of eating the Lord's Supper. And this Lord's Supper is apparently much more than a cracker and a tiny cup of fruit of the vine, which is what I typically do when I take the Lord's Supper, or what I call the Lord's Supper. It was a full meal. For in eating, each one takes his own supper ahead of others, and one is hungry, and another is drunk. So it's like it's kind of like a potluck at a church today, where you don't wait for one another. Everybody doesn't get equal opportunity to get food. It's just a madhouse where people go grab whatever they want and eat as much as they want. And the first one there gets whatever he wants, but the last one in line has nothing. So I think it's interesting to think about and talk about what was the Lord's Supper to them. And I think certainly this passage indicates that it's not a tiny little snack or a tiny little representative nibbling of a cracker and a sipping of a tiny cup of fruit of the vine. It was a full meal. That when the church gathered together for the Lord, for the purpose of taking the Lord's Supper, it was to engage in a full meal. And I don't see that happening today. So, I mean, if you're going to come together and just live for yourself and not be concerned about other people, then you should just stay at home and eat your meals at home. For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, Take, eat, this is my body which is broken for you, do this in remembrance of me. In the same manner he also took the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood, this do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. Now, so I just had the idea, he just said as often as you drink it. I've heard many people say that you must do this on Sunday, and you cannot do it on any day other than Sunday, because we have what Acts 20 verse 7 says, on the first day of the week when they gathered to break bread. Well, they might have just gathered one time on the first day. I mean, I certainly would agree that they met on the first day, kind of on a regular basis. And, the first day of the week is when Jesus was resurrected, so that's kind of the new most significant day of the week is Resurrection Day. But Jesus said, as often as you drink it. So whenever you do this, I don't think it would be wrong to take the Lord's Supper in remembrance of Jesus on a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or any other day. I don't think it violates anything. And we could certainly entertain a debate along those lines if anybody felt strongly about it. So he says, just do it in remembrance of me. And it certainly doesn't sound like a full meal. They were observing the actual Passover meal when Jesus instituted this Lord's Supper. It was a full meal with lamb as the main course. And they happened to have unleavened bread because it's also the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And I guess they just had wine. I don't know, maybe it was part of the Passover meal also. But it was a full, big meal. And Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. So it's not do this because you're hungry or do this because you love the taste of food and eat as much as you want. There is a reason for taking the Lord's Supper, and it is a memorial service to Jesus. And you should respect other people when you do it. It's not just for filling your belly or satisfying any urges you have. And you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. So when is he coming? Usually, my new understanding is the coming of Jesus as talked about in the New Testament scriptures, because they always, almost always, have an imminent coming of Jesus. When they talk about the coming of Jesus, it's imminent. It's right at the edge. Certainly the whole book of Revelation does. But even all the other references in the New Testament have an urgent expectation of the arrival of Jesus coming again. I think it most often refers to 70 AD when he came and destroyed the Jewish system. So then you say, well, if that's the case, when I take the Lord's Supper today, am I proclaiming the Lord's death till he comes, and yet he has already come in 70 AD? Well, I also believe that there are many comings of Jesus. I don't believe it's just one. In fact, I mean, you can go all through the Old Testament and you can see the day of the Lord, the great day of the Lord, the day of judgment coming. And it's many different days throughout history. Sometimes they were defeated. Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC. That was a great day of the Lord and a great day of judgment. And it's just, so I'm just looking for a different day of the Lord. Maybe it's the day that I die. The day I die, whether I'm 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, whenever I die, that will be a great day of the Lord and a great day of judgment for me. So as long as I live, if I take the Lord's Supper, I proclaim the Lord's death until I die, which is the day of the Lord when he comes to me and takes, or you could say it's kind of like what some people would view as the death angel. When the death angel comes, you can't die unless it's God's will that you die. And so when Jesus comes and says it's my day to die, then that will be the day that Jesus comes to me. So I see that possibility. Your day of death, you will probably die on a different day than me. Unless the whole world dies on the same day, which I'm not getting into. But the day of the Lord most likely will be a different day for you than it will for me, because you will die on a different day than me. So I think when he comes could be a reference to whenever you die. Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. Well, really, whenever you sin at all, in any way, you're guilty of the body and blood of the Lord, because he died for your sins. And if you sin in any way, you are disregarding the sacrifice he made for you, and you essentially require the blood and body of Jesus to be on the cross to forgive you. So he's just saying it's a sin. And every one of us are unworthy to reap the benefits of Jesus' sacrifice. So I think what it's just saying, if you disrespect one another, if you come taking the Lord's Supper and don't view it as a memorial service to what Jesus has done for you, if you view it as an opportunity for you to gorge yourself on food ahead of other people so that they have nothing, then that's a sin. So it's impossible for any one of us to be worthy. So whenever you take the Lord's Supper, you have sin in your life. You have sinned in your life. You are not worthy of the sacrifice of Jesus. So that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about if you disrespect the meal and the purpose for this Lord's Supper, if you disrespect why you're doing it or who you're doing it with, then it is a sin. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner, so it's the way you eat and drink. So if you're gorging yourself just to fill your tummy, versus being respectful of other people and thinking about why you're even doing it in reference to Jesus' death on the cross. If you do it in an unworthy manner, you eat and drink judgment to yourself, not discerning the Lord's body. So you don't need to be afraid to take the Lord's Supper. You just don't need to be disrespectful when you do it. For this reason, many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep. I think that means many are dead. For this reason, many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep. I don't know. Give me your thoughts on that. What do you think verse 30 means? For if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world. So you are chastened so that you will change and not spend eternity in hell, which is a big issue for me. Maybe I've explained it in different places, but I don't want to go into it right here because it's already a long video. Therefore, my brethren, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. But if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, lest you come together for judgment. And the rest I will set in order when I come. So Paul intended to come back to Corinth, and he just says, when you take the Lord's Supper, don't be disrespectful. Don't think it's time just to fill your stomachs. It's a time to reflect on what Jesus did for you. It's not for the purpose of filling up your stomach or for getting drunk, which makes you think, well, was the wine alcoholic? Very well could have been. Most likely was, really. But anyway, that completes 1 Corinthians 11, a discussion of the Lord's Supper and the head covering. Please share your comments with me down below. Like and subscribe, turn on notifications so we can study together.